Take control of armies from the 5 kingdoms of Araucania and vie for the throne of the ancient king in Wrath of Kings. Master your skills on the battlefield over on beastofwar.com. Fight for the Iron Kingdoms as a warcaster. Take control of the mighty jacks, arcane devices, and dark sorceries to bring the fight to the War Machine Hub on beastofwar.com.
So, hi everybody, welcome back to What's in the Box. Myself and John are here to talk bolt action. Early war this time.
Early war, yes. In the form of the Char B1 bis, which is the French medium tank.
Yeah. Now, would it have been called a medium tank at the time, or would it have been a heavy tank at the time? Because it is quite big compared to some of its contemporaries.
It is a big bugger of a thing. I got to see one in Bovington up close.
Yeah.
They are not small.
Yeah.
They're tall and they're long. They're not very wide, but they're tall and long. I would have said I think the French classified it as a medium at the time.
Okay. Because was there something bigger and heavier at the time than this, or?
Some of the Russian designs, early war designs, some of the Russian heavies back then would have been a bit bigger.
Okay.
A bit more fearsome.
Let me see. Let me just make sure I get everything out of the box here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so first things first.
Yes.
We have all of our French markings. You can't really see them here because they're on white.
You have French markings and German markings.
And German. Did Germans use these?
The Germans used them after the fall of France. They captured them and started to repurpose them.
So that's why there's...
Yes, two
cards.
Yep. In particular, the Germans used them for flamethrowers and various other types of machine as well.
I find it interesting that... Well, actually, no. It makes perfect sense that Germany, once having conquered France, would have said, well, these tanks are ours now.
Yeah, pretty much. And you find a lot of, not particularly the Char B, but the Somua S-35, they cut the turret and the top armor off them and they turned them into artillery pieces, tank destroyers, and all sorts of stuff.
I suppose if it's already made, why let the work go to waste?
It's like what they did with the Skoda works when they took Czechoslovakia. They started to repurpose everything to their own means, put their own guns and stuff onto them and use them that way.
All right, so in the box, we also get our little booklet, which has some nice history on the vehicle.
Yes.
And then we start going through all of the instructions on how to put one of these bad boys together.
And now, they go through each variant as well, because there were subtle changes between the three that you can build in the kit.
Well, this one has a small machine gun at the front here.
Yep. Whereas
this one appears to have...
a flamethrower, I think that one.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah, because it even says at the top flammpanzers, so...
Flammpanzer?
Yeah. Flammpanzer.
They are quite nice. And yeah, this one has a bigger gun in the hull.
Yeah. That'll be the standard gun.
See, this is one thing I always wondered at the beginning of the war, having hull-mounted heavy guns with a lighter gun on top. Was it just that the technology wasn't there to actually mount a heavier gun on top?
Correct, yes. The tanks at the time weren't thought of to be fighting other tanks. So anti-tank wasn't important. So what they ended up doing was this... single-man turret or sometimes twin-man turret on the top of a vehicle that had the anti-tank gun.
Right.
Usually crewed by the friggin' commander.
Really?
Yeah. We'll get into that in a minute.
Well, I love John talking early war.
We'll get into that. What the main punch of the tank was still based on First World War thinking.
Yeah.
Is that these vehicles are going to be there to break defenses and move through.
Move through trenches, which is why most of them were quite long.
Yep, so they had trench crossing ability. They had a howitzer, usually mounted in the hull.
Yep.
In the Char B's case.
Oh look, there's a machine gun nest there, boom.
Yeah, hit that with high explosive. And then they had to be heavily armored enough to be able to support infantry while not being overly fast. So they knew they were going to be targets.
Yeah. So
they armored them effective against what anti-tank they knew existed at the time. And you got the Char B.
Yes.
Do you want to go through the sprues before we wax?
Let's go with the kit before you wax, because you have greater knowledge on this than me any day of the week. So, we have this.
The huge hull sides there at the start of the sprue.
Yeah, these?
Yeah.
Now, what was the suspension like in these?
Rubbish.
Pretty poor?
Rubbish.
All right, so we have turret top and bottom down the bottom here. We have a couple of bits of the front and back of the hull.
I believe they're both rear hull.
Both rear hull?
Yeah,
different variants?
Yeah, two different types.
Okay, we have lower hull. This?
Is part of the gun assembly, the hull gun mount.
Okay, I assume exhausts?
Exhausts.
We then have this?
A spare track.
Radio?
Yep.
Commanders.
German and French commanders in the kit.
Nice to have.
Yep.
This?
Another rear armor plate.
Okay. See towing hooks.
Towing hooks, yeah.
Over here we have a vision block, little teeny weeny gun turret here.
That's the flamethrower point, yeah.
We have a little machine gun and a few other bits. We then have our main hull.
Yep.
Mount.
Yep, gun mount for the hull.
And more towing hooks.
Yes.
And a couple of arms.
Yep.
And this is gun mount too.
Yep.
Other screw. We have the other side.
Inner hull sides, yeah.
We have the howitzer.
Yep.
We have something else, a gun.
That is the turret-mounted gun. That's the anti-tank gun.
We have a mount. We have these, which are a couple of cowlings.
They are for the commander's vision block.
These.
An opened hatched version of the vision block.
Okay. And moving down here, lots of hatches.
Lots of hatches for different variants.
Yep. Entrenching tools, pioneer tools.
Mostly added by the Germans, yes.
Yep. Here.
Is more tool sets. I believe that's part of a towing A-frame there. I'm not too sure.
And these look to be some form of gun? Parts of a gun, maybe? I'm seeing breeches.
Unsure.
Okay, we have some wrap chain, we have some drive wheels, we have fender, fender, and then we have the tracks in 8 components.
Yep.
I'm still not a fan of the 8-component track.
I am.
Are you?
I am when... See, this is I was going to say your phrase there. This is the thing.
Yeah.
Italeri makes this kit for
Yes.
Warlord. So Warlord subsidiarized this one, and this goes out as a bolt
Warlord
action.
and artillery.
Yeah. I think that Italeri, with their early tank kits, the early 156, really struggled with how to do the track. So we see it's the early kits like the Sherman and stuff, it was like 2-piece track or 3-piece track.
Yeah.
And the Sherman was okay.
4-piece track was what I liked working with the best in earlier ones of these.
The Sherman was okay.
Yeah.
The other Italeri kits, the Tiger was
not so okay.
Was
was
all
an
right,
8-piece,
but
I remember.
the return part of the track had a bit of a counter bend to it, which was a bit annoying. I hate to say it, the poorest one was the Panzer III. It was very awkward. It didn't work out well, but it seems like this one looks a lot more solid. I think Italeri are learning it with each kit they put out, because 156 hasn't been something that Italeri's been used to.
Yeah.
Wargaming miniatures is certainly not something Italeri has touched before they started doing the 156 range.
This is the thing. They are a scale model company that are now having to simplify their designs from a historical representation to a gaming representation.
Yeah. So you remember my old conversation about, what was it, replica over representation? There you go. So Italeri used to do, or mostly does, scale replicas.
Yes.
Now they're having to look at scale representations.
Yes.
And those two worlds don't usually mesh that well when you have a company that has been in business for 30 plus years producing only scale models.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of learning, and they've been learning. Every kit they've brought out has got better and better and better.
Well, this is the great challenge that Italeri had to begin with, because, all right, now, I know this is probably going to sound awful, but they had to look at the kits they were making and say, how do we dumb this down?
They have to be simplified so that your average wargaming modeler who isn't willing to spend an amount of time that is excessive, unlike us scale modelers who will quite happily spend, and I have spent 60 hours build time on one vehicle.
Well, I mean, you spend an evening at it and it's just like, oh, that's one side of suspension done.
Potentially, sometimes it's one suspension unit. Working on a Sherman, there's 5 hours per suspension unit.
Yeah,
there's 6 of those.
Yeah. Well, again, the Char B kit looks nice. I'm unsure about the track, but I'll let you build this one.
All right.
Now, historically, the Char B.
Historically, the Char B.
It's a bad rap.
A lot of the French tanks get a bad rap.
Yes.
A few of them deservedly so.
Yeah.
A few of them not so deservedly so. And I would argue the Char B, for all its faults and problems, wasn't a victim of its own engineering so much.
Right.
And I've been learning a lot of this off historians like Steve Zaloga and some of the really big, the guys that I would consider gods, if I believed in such things. They would be the men up in the clouds.
They are your pantheon.
And I am the peasant on the ground looking up at them going, please sir, feed me info. These guys have done all the research into it. They've went to the French archives, they've looked at it all. And in a lot of cases you find the people that are being given the SOM US 35s and the Char Bs weren't getting them until the Germans were already crossing the border and getting involved. So what they found is that platoons of Char B1s were being issued to the crews 2 weeks before they were being sent into action. And 2 weeks is not enough to train, familiarize yourself with, and do maneuvers with before you're going into combat.
Now, deployment-wise, were they not deployed in small units compared to the Germans' bigger unit deployments? If I remember right, to begin with.
Tactically, this was the French's biggest problem. They again believed this was going to be World War I. They believed that their tank force just needed to support the infantry, and the infantry was going to do the bulk of the fighting. The tanks were there as support. That's where you see a lot of these tanks having howitzers fitted to them rather than big anti-tank guns. Or effective anti-tank guns, you could say. And the Char Bs were generally put together in platoons and operated as platoons fairly close together. The rest of them fairly evenly spread out, didn't work so well that way. And what they found was, because the crews didn't have enough time on the vehicle, the whole myth of French tanks breaking down and not operating correctly isn't really down to the engineering of the tank. It's down to the crew not understanding, if I do this, this might break. And when they found that out, it was already too late. But the Char B has some major problems as far as tank crew layout goes. That is not great, and was very, put it to the rest of the Allies. Quite a few. I believe it had, hang on, it'll actually tell me here. 4.
Okay, crew of 4, that's not bad.
Yeah, so I believe that makes it a 2-man turret and a 2-man hull. Hull crew.
Well, I wouldn't try and squeeze a third person into that teeny weeny turret.
No, and I'm sure 2 is tight enough already as it is. The main problem with these sort of tanks, and this layout of tank was very quickly dropped by all Allied forces, because even the Brits were playing around with stuff that looked sort of similar layout.
Well, you had the Grant and the Lees, didn't you?
You had the Grant, you had the Grant and the Lee, the M3 tank. Considered was a stopgap. Because they were going from the M3 Stuarts to the M2 mediums, and then the M3 came out, which was the stopgap because, like you said quite rightfully, the technology wasn't there to mount a big gun into a turret. They just didn't have the metallurgy down to the point where
they could run
the recoil of such a big gun wouldn't shatter the turret ring and throw the thing off the vehicle.
I'm sure it probably took a long while to actually figure out the engineering for that.
And building lathes for what on Sherman is it's a 6-foot turret ring, 6-foot diameter ball bearing ring, which has 250 ball bearings in it. I still remember this for when we got ours refurbished.
Did you do the refurbishment on it, or did you send it away?
When we had ours, we got it refurbished ourselves. You
got someone in to do it?
Do you remember Harland and Wolff, the big ship company, built the Titanic, you know? When they went bust, all their heavy equipment was auctioned off. And we knew an engineer that had acquired one of their floor lathes. And I mean a floor lathe that could take a 13-foot diameter ring. That's what it was able to turn. He'd acquired this. He'd got this in the auction, and we said, "Could you reface the inside of our turret ring?" And and this was beautiful because he turned it, smoothed it all out, and then got another machine in, and it face welded the inside of the turret ring, and then he returned it to bring it back to the standard diameter that it was. So we were able to fit brand new ball bearings, which were 1/2 inch each, 250 of them, into this ball bearing ring, and it was a masterpiece of technology. But that's the stuff that they lacked in the early war period. They just didn't have that capability. Back to the crew layout. Char B suffers 2 major problems. One, it overburdens the commander. So the commander is fundamental in the target designation, loading and firing of the anti-tank gun in the turret. Because the second guy is only there, I believe, as a radio operator. This guy's sole job is communication between tank and occasionally helping load and fire the coax machine gun in the turret. The commander has to do everything else. He has to command his tank, aim, load, fire the anti-tank gun.
And if he's a platoon commander,
communicate to the other tanks. So he is overburdened to hell. You also have an overburdened driver. Because the driver because the gun is mounted side to him, like right next to him. The philosophy was that this gun can't traverse on its own. It acts like a stug, like a self-propelled gun. So the tank has to turn to bring this gun on. So they thought, that's a good job for the driver. So they made this really intricate steering system to allow the tank to increment itself by degrees.
Right.
Beautiful piece of technology. The problem is, the driver has now got the tank pointed at the target.
Yeah.
Well, he's pointed the gun at the target.
Yeah.
He may as well elevate the gun now. So he has an elevation reticle on his vision block.
Okay.
So he will now manually hand crank the gun.
Right. So tank is now stopped. You are now gunner.
Yes. So he now manually cranks the gun to the elevation that he believes as he's watching the target. And if the target's moving, he's still having to track it with his vehicle. Okay?
Yeah.
So now that he's done all that,
Yeah.
well, he may as well fire the gun too. So he has the trigger mechanism there too. So he fires the gun.
Mm-hmm.
He has the other poor sod behind him, whose only job is the loader.
That's all he has to do.
Pretty much. So you have these two guys, these two incredibly important guys to the commanding of the tank, the fighting of the tank, and the moving of the tank.
Yeah. Also shooting the tank.
Operating the two main weapons on the vehicle.
Yeah.
With two other guys basically subsidiary to them.
Yeah,
and
just doing a lot less.
Yeah.
Okay, I definitely now understand the layout issues this tank had.
Yeah, it's much like the Germans' Panzer I and Panzer II. Panzer II, two-man turret. Again, commander overburdened because he had a 20mm auto gun and a coax machine gun to worry about.
Yeah.
And Panzer I was just terrible because it was a single-man turret and a single-man driver, so it was a two-man team.
Yeah.
The commander had to do everything for those two machine guns in his turret.
Really? So load, aim, fire.
Load, aim, fire. They're going to jam, so you've got to get that sorted out and communicate with everyone else. So you can see where all the early war fascination comes from because of all these tanks that were so imperfect. They had everything else right, but the crew just wasn't there yet.
Yeah, yeah, and the actual tactics behind what the crew was doing just feels like it wasn't there yet. All right, John, we've waxed lyrical enough for now.
Yes.
I'm going to send you away to build this, and we will be right back. Okay, everybody, we're back. John, how was the build?
Pretty good, actually.
How was the track?
The track, Italeri, mwah, good job. Good job. Excellent job.
Awesome.
Show it off. And
yeah. So
see.
we have it here under the close camera. You've built the howitzer version.
Yep, I've built the standard French one.
Yeah, the hatches look teeny. Weeny, teeny.
They are.
I'm guessing all of this, is it engine?
Yes and no.
And no? Okay.
It's engine with an access corridor. There is a corridor down the side of the inside of the tank.
For why?
To access the engine while under fire.
Okay.
So the engine is mounted offside to the left of the vehicle.
Okay, so the engine's not even in the middle.
Nope, it's mounted off to one side.
Right.
And down the other side is a space about 1.5 feet wide for a mechanic to get down. Probably the loader for the main gun in the hull to go down there and tinker on stuff.
Really? Just middle of a fight, engine's acting up. Here, you stop loading, go down and fix that.
I actually kind of like this. I like the thought they put into it because it means that none of the crew have to get out under fire to work on the engine. Now, obviously, a broken fuel line is probably going to be okay to fix inside the vehicle. A broken crankshaft needs the engine out, so you're going to have to get out of the thing after that.
But for minor repair work, okay,
Yeah.
I'm kind of digging it. Overall, I still think it's very strangely designed. The narrowness of this tank, if you look at it,
Yeah,
look how blasted narrow this is.
it is very narrow. I think they're about 6 feet wide, 6 or 7 feet wide, if I recall right.
Oh my god! But I mean, it's for all that it's an early war tank. I look at a lot of early war tanks and go, it's ugly. It's kind of pretty.
It has a certain charm to it.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, I like this big slab-sided behemoth look to it. If the crews had been properly trained on this, could it have held up? If the tactics had been different and these were, all lined up, in position, dug in, waiting for the Germans to come at them, how would they have done?
When the Germans engaged these in any numbers, like sometimes they did come across them in ones and twos, occasionally they came across them in full platoons, like 5 to 6 vehicles, sometimes even a regiment, maybe 20, 30 of them.
Yeah.
They had some serious problems with them. They had some real problems getting through them.
Could they penetrate?
The Germans couldn't get these things on the front, and even on the Panzer IIIs with the 50mm anti-tank gun, couldn't get through the side.
Right.
They had a lot of issues with them.
But the Germans were fast.
The Germans were fast and were able to outmaneuver them. And that was the key to the Germans' victories against the Char B.
Yeah.
You got around behind it, you cut it off from its supplies and reinforcements, and it was a dead duck after that.
Yeah. But, like I said, if there was an entrenchment just built of these, all hull down, all dug in, all the howitzers pointed forward, driver doesn't have to worry about driving about, he can just aim and fire. Commander still has to worry about all of his stuff, but doesn't have to worry about moving about and trying to pick targets. Could they have done a better job?
They possibly could have delayed more. I couldn't say for certain if they could have beat any German forces.
Well, the weapons they had, could they take out German tanks?
The anti-tank gun and the turret wasn't that great, so Panzer III not really. Panzer I's and II's, 38Ts and stuff, not really a big problem at
and I'm
close
assuming
range.
the high-X howitzer would do squat.
To the smaller tanks, it would tear them apart.
Oh, okay.
You know, a Panzer I only has 15mm of armor. A Panzer II maybe has 15 to 20. So a howitzer shell, a 75 howitzer shell, hitting that will either smash, like shatter the armor plate, or it'll break the weld.
Okay.
And if it breaks the weld, the tank is going to fly into bits.
Yeah, fair enough.
But your Panzer IIIs, your Panzer IVs didn't have a lot to worry about.
Right. And after that, you see, this is the thing. Whenever I hear the French in World War II, I've never heard any of the epic, heroic stories of anything that the French have done.
Yep.
You always hear about French resistance, but you never really hear about the French army themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's...
It's a bit of a shame.
I think partly the French are to blame for that.
Really?
Is that they didn't quite champion their army. I mean, even today when you talk to Roma, the French army isn't something that inspires a lot of great national pride. And that's how the French have kind of always been. They've never seen the army as, since Napoleonic times, they've never seen the army as something that brings great pride to the nation.
Okay.
And there were some really excellent French soldiers. Billiot, who, if you play World of Tanks, you might have heard his name if you've won the medal named after him, was a French tank commander in a Char B1. And he did some amazing actions with his platoon against the Germans and held up a lot of units for a lot of time.
Yeah, and then, well, I mean, like, you've mentioned World of Tanks now. The French Tech tree is in there now. Some of the tanks I see in there, they look super futuristic whenever you actually start playing them in game.
Yeah.
But I've never heard of them having actions during World War II. Whenever you think World War II, you think, oh right, America and Britain rocked into France, rocked through Belgium, rocked into Germany, job done. It's
mainly because you find that French tank production sort of ceased in 1940 and didn't pick up again until 1945 when the factories were put back together and remanned by the French government.
I see. So basically, they didn't have the infrastructure to actually get up and get going again.
No.
Okay.
But when they did, some really weird stuff started turning up.
You had the autoloaders.
You had all the autoloaders. You had the AMX-13s turn up, and they are just strange. Yeah. And I've heard one of the World of Tanks guys who, you know, the Chieftain and Challenger, you guys are amazing. One of them went for a ride in an AMX-13, and they got to have a look at how it would be maintained and how it would be operated in the field, and he hated it.
Really?
He said to get the, what was it? If I was a Royal Engineer working on this tank, to get the engine out, I have to dismantle the front of the tank. You have to take the whole front plate off, which covers the driver's position, everything. All that armor plate has to come off before you can get at the engine with anything like a spanner. Right. And the French were churning out some weird stuff. The AMX M4s, some of the weirder designs like the Lorraines and that, and the Bachalions and all, they were all experimented with, and the French went, what are we doing with this stuff? This is crap. They had the whole oscillating turret design.
Oscillating?
Oscillating. You know, the AMX-13's turret.
Yeah.
The whole turret moves up and down with the...
A ball, like on a ship with the compass?
It moves, essentially.
So it's a free-floating turret?
The turret is pinned by two giant ball bearing runs that let the gun elevate with the whole turret.
That's weird.
The problem is that because we were moving into the Cold War era and the French were going oscillating turrets are the way forward, even the Americans looked at the oscillating turret and went, that's not a bad idea. and then this whole Red Menace thing started happening, and they were like, how do you seal that from nuclear, biological, and chemical agents? Well, you don't. So the oscillating turret died in the Cold War because everyone realized you can't airtight that at all. Like, you can't hermetically seal that vehicle.
Yeah. Okay, here's one I'll put you on the spot. You may not know this one. What is the current tank that the French military use?
The Leclerc.
The Leclerc. I have not seen one. You will have to show me.
It is a beast.
Really?
It looks like a great big beast.
Okay.
I'm not keen on the shape of it, but I still look at it and go, I can respect that vehicle because it just looks mean. I went to the Samur Tank Museum back in 2009, maybe earlier.
You're right there, old man.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. And next to a Char B, they had the Leclerc, and the Leclerc just looked like a panther compared to everything else in that museum. It was just broad, low. The gun has like a stupidly long gun barrel. It's the longest in NATO.
Really?
So it's I think it's still a 120, but it has the longest gun barrel in all the NATO tank forces, including Challenger 2.
Wasn't that one of the theories? Longer gun barrel means higher muzzle velocity?
Higher muzzle velocity, but I think it's more down to who manufactures the guns. And because it's not German, it's a longer gun barrel, because the Germans like the Rheinmetall 120 and the Americans like the Rheinmetall 120.
Okay.
And they still use it. So.
Okay, fair enough.
French tanks, World War II, they were on the right track, but they weren't pushed out quick enough.
Blitzkrieg.
But Blitzkrieg, basically. To be fair, if the French hadn't spent so much money on the Maginot Line...
Well, you see, this is the thing. The Maginot Line was impressive.
Oh, no doubt. But it soaked up money and men like nothing else.
It's one of those things I always wonder was why it wasn't extended further. You know, they looked at the Ardennes and went, no one can get through that. I would not accept that if I was building defences. I would say, no, there's a great big gaping gap in my defences. Build it on.
I think the Maginot Line was really more, in my opinion, if a few French guys in the comments want to correct me on that, the Maginot Line to me feels like it was more of a prestige piece. Okay. It was more of a, we can make our country feel safe by putting this up.
Yeah.
Because this is where the direct borders join. Yeah, okay. So we can look to be contributing to this whole League of Nations, everything's fine, everything's peaceful, but we don't necessarily need to extend it north or south. Okay. And to the French designers and tacticians' mindset, they were totally right with the Ardennes. Okay. You technically shouldn't have been able to take a tank force through there. Okay. And even when you read Panzer Generals by Heinz Guderian, Heinz Guderian, and then you read his other book, which is the Achtung Panzer, which was the handbook for all the tank crews back then, you find that they had huge problems getting their stuff through the Ardennes. Right. And it was only by a stroke of fortune that nobody actually seen them coming. Right. Because a few examples from that moment in history is tales of traffic jams that are 40 miles long. Of tanks? Of tanks and trucks and men and artillery, and it's all jammed into the Ardennes, and they're all wondering, what the hell are we doing here? Yeah. And they realized that all it would take is one spotter plane. Yeah, they were all sat there scared that there would be one plane fly over the Ardennes and go, that looks like an army group. But it didn't happen. Yeah. This whole stroke of genius, this Hitler's master plan thing, was totally reliant on there not being a single plane over the Ardennes, or single spotter, or single scout. Yeah. Even one guy in a foxhole with a pair of binoculars, and a radio set. Yeah, okay. And if any of that had been there, that may not have happened. Well, again, the Allies would have been warned. If it took them a long time to get through the Ardennes, then yeah, the Allies could have, massed. Britain and France could have massed up. On the counterpoint to that, okay, had anyone spotted the stuff in the Ardennes, how many French generals and how many British generals in particular would have taken the threat seriously? Because you're looking at armies that were still looking at World War I and saying that's what the next war is going to be. Even though they have seen the Blitzkrieg in Czechoslovakia, they've seen it in Poland, they've seen the Russians helping the Germans in the same sort of tactics. Yeah. They've seen this fast moving force, and there's stuff in the Ardennes that looks as big as an army group. I think they would have dug in. I think you would have seen trench warfare that the Germans would have then had to break through to begin with. I think that if that was the mindset, that's what those military minds would have said. Right, there's something coming, we know where it's coming, let's dig trenches. But there's more buts to this. There's so many buts to this whole thing. If you play this scenario out to say that the forces in the Ardennes have been spotted, I believe The British High Command would have said, it's not going to pose a real threat. It's going to be slow getting out of the Ardennes. We can take our time to form up and make a mass armoured counterattack on them. Or a mass infantry counterattack on them. The French may have been the same. The French may have just said, we'll stick to the Maginot Line. We'll send a couple of divisions over to have a look at the Ardennes. We'll let the British come in and support with us on that. But we're not going to take it seriously because we believe the main thrust is coming through the Maginot Line.
Fair enough.
Because if you can't penetrate the whole canopy of the Ardennes, you can't see how vast this is. And if you can't, if a few of your high-placed generals don't take that seriously.
If they look at it and go, oh, it must be a scouting force just trying to nip around the end. Let's actually bulk up around the end of the Maginot Line. So that if anything comes at us from there, we're okay. At which point the Germans would have just drove right past it again.
And the priority at the time was the Belgian campaign as well, because that is big open fields. That's where the Blitzkrieg's coming. Everyone knows it's coming that way. Why do we care about a few tanks lying in a forest? And if you have 2 or 3 generals at the top of each army believe that wholeheartedly, that will filter down right down to the ground troops who will say, why should we bother defending this? This isn't a real thrust. This is only a diversion. And it turns into the real thing and they go, oh.
But I don't know, it might have got people ramped up a little more earlier to actually have some more military units ready to actually thrust back. I mean, I don't know how the engagements worked out. I mean, like, I hear, Blitzkrieg and I think, all right, they just rolled right in and straight through to Paris. I don't know how much fighting was done on the road to Paris. Again, victors write history, so I've never heard that story. Because the victors will never write about a time when they got their ass handed to them.
If you want some reading material on that, Hans von Luck, Panzer Commander, he has a great retelling of the French campaign from his point of view as part of the scout regiment for the 21st Panzer Division. And he does state several times, when the French entrenched, it was near impossible to move them.
Really?
He said when they found a bit of high ground, he says in one case they found a hill, they entrenched themselves up there, and he said we could not move them. It only took Rommel turning up to the 21st Panzer and going, right, what do we need to do here? Right. And he literally took first-hand command. He came up with the scout units, looked at the situation in front of him and went, right, so from this point to this point, we need artillery there, there, and there. There's a couple of houses over there. If the wind is blowing right, set fire to those. That'll put a smoke screen across their line, then move around. And that was essentially how the Germans won the French campaign, because every time the French dug in or the British dug in, we were incredibly hard to move. And it was only by the superior leadership and superior skill of some of the German commanders that they even got to where they were going.
Well, that's very different to what I've always imagined it, because I always imagined it's just rock up, roll in, done. History
in the basic sense of it is always taught that the Germans rolled up Europe. They rolled up France without a fight. And it's practically criminal to go with that line because it is nearly entirely incorrect. The British fought stupidly hard, and the French absolutely, tip your hat to them, because their rear guard at Dunkirk was unreal, and they got so many people of their own and the British off. And it's a very sore point in history to say that it was just wrapped up, because the Germans even admit that it just wasn't that.
See, it's interesting to hear that, and I may actually borrow that book of Hans von Luck from you to actually give it a read, because it's a piece of the war that I've never looked at very closely because of that misconception. All right, well, anyway, everybody, that is the Char B1, a perhaps unsung hero of World War II for the French. Drop your comments in below. What do you think yourselves? We'll move on. We will see you in the next one.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now, and be sure to check out beastsofwar.com for the latest gaming news and gaming Let's Plays. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.